This video is sponsored by Simply Safe. There's no safe like Simply Safe. The Porsche 911 GT3 RS is the most love it or hate it car currently available. Ask a Porsche fanatic, what's the pinnacle of automotive evolution? They'll say GT3 RS.
There's nothing like a Porsche.
It's an absolute masterpiece.
It's very, very good, annoyingly.
Ask some influencer on the TikTok, what's the most overrated, overhyped car? They'll say GT3 RS.
What do you think is the most overrated car?
GT3 RS, I think that's probably it.
Used prices have inflated to double the already staggering $250,000 sticker. With dealer markups, a new GT3 RS can be $100K more than the ordinary GT3. Now that's a lot of money for just 2 letters. That's $50,000 a letter. You can see why the GT3 RS has become a supercar meme. Even calling it a supercar will start an internet fight over whether it technically counts as one. Now, I don't know the answer, and neither does the GT3 RS, but the closest you'll get to an answer is this. The GT3 RS isn't designed to be a supercar. It isn't designed to be loved or hated. It isn't designed with even a moment's thought about how the internet is gonna feel about it. Maybe it's not even really designed at all, because the GT3 RS is engineered. And it's engineered with one sneaky purpose: to have the maximum possible, mind-blowing, spine-crushing speed on a racetrack while still allowed technically on public roads. And that's true for every Porsche RS for the past 70 years. When Porsche puts those 2 letters on a car, they stand for something. Literally, they stand for Rennsport, which loosely translates to racing. They reserve that for only their most special vehicles. The values that make an RS car special are part of Porsche's DNA. It's the pursuit of engineering perfection without a thought to the accountants, the haters, or even their customers. To understand all of the great RS cars and tell the story of Rennsport, we've got to go back to the beginning of Porsche, because that is where their obsession with racing began. Welcome to Speed. This is everything you need to know about RS. I know this is a long one, but the RS story is fascinating and long. We tried to cut it down, but we just really didn't want to take anything out. So without further ado, a very long video on Porsche RS. Porsche's racing history kicked off with their very first car, the 356, but that wasn't designed to be a race car. The 356 was the brainchild of Ferdinand Ferry Porsche, son of Ferdinand Sr., the designer of the Volkswagen Beetle. Now, little Ferry was a car nut, okay? He owned Alfa Romeos, BMWs, Mercedeses, and developed race cars like the Cisitalia 360, powered by a supercharged flat 12 that revved to 10,500 RPM and was designed to compete in Formula One. Dude, a supercharged flat 12? So when it was time to build the first car bearing the Porsche Nama, there's no way that it was going to be anything like his father's Beetle. So he sat down with a team of engineers to design a revolutionary sports car. And what they came up with was a 4-cylinder, air-cooled, rear-engine car that's not like, just is not a Beetle. Nothing like it at all.
This is the car in question. No, wait, sorry. Hang on. It's easy to be confused. This is it.
And with this car, the Porsche racing legacy began. Now, Ferry knew that a small car with enough power was way more fun to drive than a huge car with lots of power. And the same lightweight and nimble handling that made the 356 fun also made it a great little race car. In 1951, it was the first German car to compete at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and it won its class. The 356 was hugely popular among privateers, racers who aren't financially supported by a manufacturer. It was partially so popular because you could drive it on public roads. That means you could drive to the track, race, and if everything went according to plan, you could drive home after. Now, catering to the weekend warrior crowd worked. Orders flooded in, and by the time the 356 finally stopped production in 1965, after a 17-year run, Porsche had sold 76,000 of them. Now, of course, in Rennsport, speed and technology never stop advancing. NSA, never stop advancing. And Porsche launched a second car just 5 years after the introduction of the 356. That was the 550. Now, if the 356 was a road car that you could race, the 550 was a race car that you could road. Porsche's first race-focused side project available to consumers. With a body made entirely of aluminum, the 550 weighed just 1,200 pounds. That is so light. That's like 2 average motorcycles. And to keep that weight close to the center for even faster handling, they moved the engine up in front of the rear axle. The first prototype 550s reused the 356's air-cooled flat 4, but that wasn't enough power, baby. So Porsche set out to develop a new engine. They gave the job to mechanical engineer Ernst Fuhrmann, who would end up being a key figure in Porsche's history. During his long career, he would serve as Porsche's technical director, general manager, and eventually the chairman of the board. All right, now much of Porsche's story is the result of engineers who care about maximum performance, not maximum profit. A normal car company would have built a second car designed to have more sales success than the 356, but that's not the Porsche way. Not back then, at least. And this way of thinking almost tanked the company a few times. They launched a car that was far less successful, all right, at least by the standard most companies use. The 550 sold just 90 units, but by Porsche standards, it was way better than the 356. And with the Fuhrmann engine, it got even closer to the Porsche ideal of performance perfection. The Fuhrmann-powered 550 was renamed the 550 RS, and the RS designation was born. With the Fuhrmann engine, the very first RS car in full race spec was capable of a mouth-watering, mind-boggling 135 horsepower. Now, I know that that doesn't sound like a lot now, and race car for the road has become a tired marketing slogan, but the 550 really was a race car. It was classified for Formula 2 racing, meaning it was a Formula 2 car, okay? And back then, Formula 1 and Formula 2 sometimes raced on the same track at the same time. The Formula 2 guys just kind of like got out of the way. Imagine you're in a GT3 RS and they're like, hey, Max Verstappen is coming up behind you, get out of the way. That's insane. The 550 was literally a race car that you could walk into a Porsche dealer, pay for, and drive off of the lot, which is exactly what James Dean did. At 24 years old, actor James Dean was an icon. He was the coolest man in Hollywood, known for the brooding bad boys he played on screen. He epitomized the sentiment of live fast and die young. On September 21st, 1955, he walked into Competition Motors in Hollywood, California, right down there, and traded his Porsche 356 for the more powerful and faster 550 Spyder. Dean immediately nicknamed his new car the Little Bastard. The mid-engine configuration with faster handling than the 356 required more precision from the driver, and apparently the little bastard was a bit of a to drive. Dean discovered this for himself on his first days of ownership, reportedly having 2 accidents, including spinning off of Mulholland Drive, crashing into a bunch of garbage cans. Now, if those accidents weren't enough reason to worry, 2 days after buying the 550, actor Alec Guinness, the guy who played Obi-Wan Kenobi, he saw Dean with the car outside of a restaurant. Now, Obi-Wan claims that a strange feeling came over him, probably the Force, and he pleaded with James to not drive the car, saying that if he did, he'd be dead within a week. That prediction was not only creepy, it was also accurate. 1 week later, while heading north from Los Angeles to compete in a race in Salinas, California, James Dean wrecked Little Bastard and died. Sounds like James Dean should have listened to him, but if like I got a new car and one of my friends was like, "You'll be dead within a week," I'd be like, "F you, dude. What the hell?" That was way before Star Wars too. So this dude had the Force. Like, what if he said that in his audition? Hey, so I'm reading this thing, talking a lot about like space magic. I'll have you know, I predicted James Dean's death. George Lucas is like, what? Never mind. You want it to start? Okay. The Porsche 550 successor, the 718, was yet another race car for the road. But honestly, way more race car than road car. This little motherfucker was race car AF, dude. It's so race car that it's actually a bunch of different race cars. The 718 RSK made its debut at the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 1957. Then, in 1960, they introduced the RS60. It had a brand new double wishbone rear suspension and a larger 160 horsepower engine, which powered it to an overall victory at the 12 Hours of Sebring. Next, they came out with the 718 WRS, the Weltrennsport, or World Racing. Now that one contained a flat 8-cylinder engine making 240 horsepower, but just displacing 2 liters. That's a lot of cylinders that are really little. It finished 8th overall at Le Mans, but in its class, the 2-liter class, it finished 1st. Now Porsches and Caymans are called 718s now, and they're in reference to this car. It was that good to Porsche. It's called an homage, hun. In 1964, Porsche and cars changed forever. Enter the 911. For 60 years, the 911 hasn't just kept the same name. It's the same rear engine layout, the same iconic shape, constant engineering progress to make it faster and handle better with each generation. No other model has done that while simultaneously being one of the most successful cars in motorsport. Maybe Corvette, but Corvette's got some pretty serious peaks and valleys. Every 911 generation has a good one. The RS badge went dormant for a bit, but 10 years after the 911 was born, it took the first major step in its legendary evolution when it received the Rennsport treatment. I've always wanted one of these bad boys, and I finally got one. I couldn't afford a full-size one yet, hit that subscribe button, but this one is still very important to me, so I want to keep it safe, and that is where today's sponsor, Simply Safe, comes in. Simply Safe offers award-winning home security, and it's perfect for keeping all the things that you love safe, big or small. Their system can cover your entire home and garage and shelf with advanced sensors and cameras to detect break-ins, fires, floods, and more. And just like this bad boy, it's award-winning. Except Simply Safe's award isn't pretend in my head. It was named among the best home security systems of 2024 by US News and World Report. That's 5 years running. It was even ranked the best customer service of 2024 in home security by Newsweek, an award that I have been trying to get for years. And unlike my car payments, you will never be locked into a long-term contract, so you can cancel at any time. Pricing is transparent and affordable, starting at less than $1 a day with no hidden fees ever. With Fast Protect monitoring and Simply Safe's exclusive lifeguard protection, agents can act within 5 seconds of receiving your alarm. Via the Smart Alarm indoor camera, they can even see and speak to intruders in real time, stopping them in their tracks. Hey! Get the hell out of there! As your personal eye in the sky, they can confirm the emergency and convey critical details to 911, helping to get a speedy response. Hey, police? Yeah, got another one. It's a tiny car, but it's very popular. Simply put, Simply Safe's combo of advanced sensors, cameras, and groundbreaking monitoring technologies give you peace of mind. It's easy to install and activate yourself in less than an hour, or you can choose professional installation and have a pro do it. If you want to protect what matters, whether it's a dream car, miniature size, or full size, or your actual home, head to simplysafe.com/speed, S-P-E-E-D, to save 50% on your system. Plus, get a free indoor camera and a month of monitoring. There's no safe like Simply Safe. The 1973 911 Carrera RS 2.7 was a homologation special built to compete in FIA Group 4. That meant it needed to have all the race car stuff that Porsche wanted its race car to have, but be road legal. And they had to make at least 500 of them to sell to consumers. Sometimes to race in a certain series, a company would have to sell a certain number of road-going versions of the race car that they wanted to race in that series. The E30 M3, Mercedes 190 Evo, Lancia Delta Integrale, and even Porsche's legendary 959 are all homologation specials. The RS 2.7 featured an enlarged version of the 911's signature Boxer 6, making 207 horsepower. A team of 15 of Porsche's best engineers were assigned to upgrade the suspension and brakes and put the 911 on a serious diet. They recreated the 911's body panels using thinner steel and replaced the windows with thinner glass. And we haven't even mentioned the aerodynamics. The 2.7 RS was the first production car ever with front and rear spoilers. Those aren't wings. They don't create downforce. Spoilers disrupt or spoil airflow that produces drag. A big source of that is the low pressure created behind the car as it punches through the air. Now, to figure out the perfect height for the ducktail, Porsche engineers tested in a wind tunnel. Now, this was long before the age of computational fluid dynamics, i.e. computers. So they increased the height a millimeter at a time by adding thin strips of sheet metal. Once they saw the reversal point, when the pressure drag started to increase, they pulled off the last piece, and that was the height. Sick. Man, to be a fly on the wall of that wind tunnel. Be all... Now, this sort of single-minded obsession that RS engineers have doesn't come from nowhere. In fact, it comes from somewhere. And that somewhere is a small town in Germany called Weissach. That's been the home to Porsche's development center since 1971. Now, lots of automakers have similar facilities all over the world, but Weissach is different. A lot of other car companies have their main development center far away from their performance division. If they also run racing programs, that might happen at yet another location. That separation could be because there's no racetrack nearby, or because they don't want the performance nerds scaring the accountants, or the accountants scaring the performance nerds. Now, at most car companies, cars are designed by one group of engineers at the home base, And then once that's done, they're sent over to another group of engineers at the performance and racing divisions to get all spiced up. At Porsche, every car is developed at Weissach. Because of their company-wide obsession with performance, road cars are developed side by side with race cars. So when it's time to make the one that's in between, the race car for the road, it's not a big deal. They just go over there and look at that. And they walk over there and work on that. Now this is why the 2.7 RS wasn't a re-engineering project. It was about bringing out the greatness that was already there, about making the 911 reach its full potential. Not only is the 2.7 RS one of the most perfectly engineered cars ever, it's also one of the most iconic looking cars of all time. The distinctive Carrera lettering on the side, 29 available colors like bright yellow or blood orange, even wheels color matched to the decals or body. It just reeks of cool. And they actually sold quite a lot of them, almost 1,600. But 1,600 cars is nowhere near enough to satisfy current demand for possibly the most iconic 911 of all time. The 2.7 RS is the Porsche that launched 1 million replicas, customized and resto-modded classic 911s from huge names like Singer, Theon, Strat, Emery Motorsport, not to mention garage-built passion projects from Bushwick creative executives, Cool Venice dads, Deus customers across the globe, and possibly most famous of all, this guy.
I bought my first Porsche and it straight away became an RS clone. You know, what put the RS on the map to the general public really was the 73 RS Carrera. An iconic legend was born on that day.
Whenever I make a video about a Porsche, I gotta talk to Magnus Walker.
I used to joke RS stands for really special, which it kind of does, but you know, in the German speak it's Rennsport. So I've never actually owned an RS, but I've driven them. The 73 RS Carrera, you know, is really, really small. Like, they're all sort of around you, and it's the visual sight, the smell, the sound, you know, you're connected to that car. Back then, they were pretty stripped out. There were no driver aids. It sort of, for me, engages all the senses. I talk about it all the time. I mean, the greatest thing really about any model generation of Porsche is, for the most part, they're all drivable. It's usable performance is what it is for me. You can just get in and go. The RS version obviously is coming back to the race sport heritage, which the greatest thing for me is every time you get behind the wheel of a one, you kind of do feel a little bit like you're a race car driver.
After the 2.7 RS, the letters went gone back into hibernation for about a decade, until the 1984 911 SC RS. This was another homologation special, this time designed for the World Rally Championships Group B. You ever heard of it? Porsche had intended to launch the 959 to compete in that series, but design delays left them without a car for the 1984 season. Luckily, since Porsche had already been racing a 911 SC in 1983, the SCRS was considered an evolution. So they only had to produce 20 to satisfy the homologation rule, not the usual 200. In a matter of months, Porsche engineers designed and built those 20 cars using a 3-liter engine that made 280 horsepower in race trim. The naturally aspirated SCRS could actually out-accelerate the 911 Turbo. But that wasn't just because of the power. It was also down to the RS diet, which had made the SCRS 660 pounds lighter than the Turbo. It also featured the Turbo's wider body, but made with thinner sheet metal once again. Thinner glass and fiberglass for the bumpers and spoilers. As you'd expect for a rally car, the SCRS had adjustable shocks and could be raised or lowered depending on stage conditions. Rally. But because this was a Porsche, that wasn't achieved by raising or lowering spring purchase. Instead, Mechanics could move the control arms between different mounting points to raise or lower the car without changing the suspension geometry. And the car wore brakes from the 917 prototype race car that had won Le Mans. As with previous RS cars, the SCRS had a recipe for competition success, but at the last minute, after all the cars had been completed, Porsche pulled out of the WRC. They decided that fielding an entire season of rallies all over God's fat green earth would simply cost too much money. They were a much smaller company back then. But 5 of the cars were sold to a company called ProDrive, a British engineering company who specializes in building race cars for both factory teams and privateers. Now, years later, ProDrive would become famous for rally dominance working with Subaru's WRC team. But in 1984, they had just opened their doors. The SCRSs they prepared for the Rothmans Porsche rally team immediately proved that ProDrive and these Porsches were a force to be reckoned with. They campaigned those cars in the regional European and Middle Eastern Rally Championships and racked up 18 wins across the 1984 season. These are by far the most famous Porsche rally cars. These are the cars that have inspired infinite 911 Safari builds and eventually Porsche's own 911 Dakar and Rothman's livery colors as a factory option, except that it's called the Rough Roads package because, like every cool race car livery, Rothman's is cigarettes. Now, up until this point, RS cars hadn't really been available in the United States. I know. But when Porsche applied the RS treatment to the new generation of 911, the 964, they decided to change that. And it did not go well. In Europe, the 964 Porsche Carrera RS contained all the usual tricks. A revised engine with 256 horsepower, lightweight flywheel, close ratio transmission, lower ride height, stiffer springs, adjustable stabilizers, a limited slip differential. Also available in Europe was a slightly more extreme club sport package that stripped the interior, AC, sound editing, radio, carpet, and stereo, added a roll cage and racing bucket seats and harnesses. That resulted in a 350-pound weight savings over the standard Carrera. But Porsche felt that the Carrera RS was too aggressive to appeal to US buyers. To appease hardcore 911 fans in the US, they sent a specially made RS America, adding back many of the comfort features from the base 911 to the tune of 271 pounds more weight than the European Club Sport package, and just 77 pounds lighter than a standard 911. So basically, it was neither here nor there. It had less features than a regular 911, but wasn't nearly as race car as a European RS. To ordinary 911 buyers, the RS America's lack of features made it unappealing. But to the small number of American enthusiasts who would have loved a real Carrera RS, it just kind of felt half-assed. One redeeming factor was that it cost about $10,000 less than a standard Carrera. The 701 RS Americas produced took a while to sell, and many dealers ended up discounting the price even further. Now, in the US, the entire 964 generation was a low point for the 911. Now, in hindsight, this is kind of hard to believe. Used prices on the classic 911 before it and the final air-cooled 993, which came after, started rising a long time ago. That made the 964 seem like a weird in-betweener value buy for a number of years, sort of the forgotten generation of 911. But that couldn't last forever. Seemingly, as soon as I got a job and had some money, prices have skyrocketed on these. So, what explains their initial unpopularity? Well, a lot of it comes down to the original price. The 964 was a huge step forward in technology and refinement over the classic 911 that came before it, which had its roots in the 1960s. The 964 was the first road-going 911 to offer optional all-wheel drive. It was also the first 911 with anti-lock brakes. Hell, it was even the first one with power steering. All of these features made the car better, but it also made them more expensive. In 1990, just as the 964 was unveiled, the US entered a recession.
They're calling it the Monday Massacre, the worst drop in Wall Street history.
So crazy, nobody even expected it to be down this much.
And the adverse exchange rate that resulted between the US and Germany meant that by 1992, a base 964 Carrera 2 cost nearly $70,000, close to $30,000 more than the previous gen. With less money and a huge price hike, Americans stopped buying 911s. That was a problem. Now, this is before volume cars like the Cayenne came along to stabilize Porsche through leaner years. They didn't have anything to fall back on during tough economic times. They rarely had more than 2 or 3 models in production, and those were all sports cars. And at any point when the company was struggling, Porsche could have made compromises. They could have made more popular RS cars. They could have decided to make more units, make them more comfortable, make them cheaper, make them less race car. Because of the success of cars like the Carrera 2.7 RS, those letters have tremendous value. They could have stuck the RS badge on race-inspired cars that weren't really race cars and rolled around in all the cash that they made.
Dude.
Any other company probably would have, and a ton of other companies have. I'm looking at you, BMW. BMW, I love you, but you do that. What does M even mean anymore? Porsche wasn't willing to make RS a lie. They started down that road with the RS America and learned a valuable lesson. You can't fake Rennsport. There is no RS Lite. It's all or nothing. In 1995, the RS name returned with the 1995 993 generation Carrera RS. Porsche had found their way again. The 993 Carrera RS was exactly what you'd expect and what Porsche needed to revitalize the RS program. 3.8 liters, making 296 horsepower, thanks to major changes including forged pistons, dual oil coolers, bigger intake valves, and lightened rocker arms. Porsche engineers fiddled and perfected nearly every part of the car. They fitted bigger 4-piston brakes from the 911 Turbo, a gearbox with closer ratios and a shorter throw. They seam welded the body for stiffness, used an aluminum hood with 1 support strut instead of the usual 2, and used thinner glass for the windows. Any inessential thing like the headlight washers was removed to save weight. They got rid of the rear seat and most of the soundproofing. All in all, the 993 RS was 240 pounds lighter than the base Carrera. But just in case that wasn't good enough, a Club Sport version appeared once again with stripped interior, racing buckets, harnesses, a gearbox with even tighter ratios. That only saved 20 pounds over the regular RS, but that was with the addition of a welded roll cage, extra strut braces, more aerodynamic front spoiler and side skirts, and an even larger rear wing. If someone came to me and said that I could have any car in the world, this would 100% be my choice. It is the best version of the best versions of one of the best cars ever made. I love it. The 993 RS was a huge return to form compared to the RS America, but it also was not available in America. After the 964, Porsche was basically like, okay, we gave you guys a chance and you blew it. It's low-key our fault, but you're basically dumb and you suck. But all that changed when the next RS appeared. A new era was beginning. And let's just say it got off to a bit of a rocky start. For over 30 years, every 911 was rear engine with an air-cooled flat 6. The 911 story is one of engineers constantly improving upon that design with each subsequent revision and generation, but never changing that formula. The 996 changed that formula the f up. They moved from air-cooled to liquid-cooled. The 996 kept the rear engine in flat six, so what was the big deal about adding coolant? How could people hate that? Every car has coolant. Well, they kind of had a point a little bit. Liquid cooling adds weight, complexity, and changes the way that the engine sounds. I also think that Porsche fans liked the fact that it was one of the only air-cooled cars left. It made it unique, it made it special. But Porsche engineers don't make any decisions arbitrarily. Like the name suggests, an air-cooled engine uses ambient air passing over the surface to keep it cool. Lots of motorcycles use air cooling because the engine is sitting out in the open. In a car, it's buried deep inside the engine bays, so vents and fans are often required to create airflow, but those can only do so much. And if the engine is in the back, like in a 911, the entire car is literally getting in the way. One of the biggest drawbacks of air cooling is the power limitation. Now, if you want an engine to make more power, you gotta have more powerful combustion in the cylinders. Now that produces more heat, and that heat's gotta go somewhere or it will damage the engine. Using liquid coolant that runs through the engine, then transfers that heat to a radiator located somewhere with better airflow is just simply the best way to do that. The basic 911 formula had reached its practical limit on power. Air cooling couldn't keep up with the increased performance that Porsche engineers knew was possible and that, quite frankly, the 911 deserved. Water cooling also ensured that the 911 would actually have a future because air-cooled engines have more emissions and Porsche was struggling to keep up with increasing emission standards. So, liquid cool, not so bad. Unfortunately, this wasn't the only problem that people had with the 996. The looks were a huge issue, especially the headlights. There were build quality issues and common mechanical issues like the dreaded IMS bearing. Some people started to come around with the release of the turbo models, the return of the Targa 911, revised engines, and a facelift in 2002 called the 996.2. That was also the basis for the first 911 GT3 RS. This is when the Rennsport designation exploded into the performance powerhouse it still represents today. The 911 GT3 without the RS on the back had existed since 1999 as a homologation special. As you'd expect, it was improved over the ordinary 911 in nearly every way. Engineer Andres Andy Pruninger had been part of that development, and in 2001, Andy was promoted to head of Porsche's GT division, the people making decisions and developing the homologation cars. Now, this is by far the second biggest 911 news of 2001. Oh God, dude, really? Now, the thing about Andy is he's obsessed with engineering for maximum performance. So when the 996.2 GT3 was built, again to satisfy racing homologation rules, it was yet another step forward. But somehow there was still room for improvement, room for sport of the Renn variety. In 2003, the 996 GT3 RS was born, and the list of changes over the normal GT3 are extensive. Different heads and valves bump power to 381 horsepower. Progressive springs replaced the GT3's linear ones. Stiffer dampers were fitted, and the car got carbon ceramic brakes. Those were incredibly rare 20 years ago and cost nearly $20,000 to replace. But they had better cooling and were half the weight of steel rotors. So we gotta put them on! The RS diet was back in other ways too, with polycarbonate windows and carbon fiber hood and rear wing. The 996 was hugely nerdy. Engineers messed with the tiniest details in the name of maximum performance. The wheel carriers were custom made for better dynamic camber. The shock towers could be removed and rotated 120 degrees from the original position to get the same alignment range as the Cup car. The race cars, ram air ducts were added to the engine bay to force more air into the engine at speed, and at 190 miles per hour, that meant 15 extra horsepower. That hyper-focused engineering, the nerdy obsessiveness of paying attention to every single detail paid off, and the GT3 RS clocked a Nürburgring lap time of 7 minutes 43 seconds. It was 4 seconds faster than the turbocharged top of the line 996, another homologation special, the GT2. The 996 generation is still maligned today as the least cool 911, but people are coming around to this generation as a whole. I mean, it's an old car now. It looks small, but the GT3 RS was a sensation immediately. How could cars so similar elicit polar opposite responses? Now, the regular 996 was trying to be the next great 911, and honestly, they're pretty great to drive, but by changing the 911 formula and its unlovable face, the 996 had an uphill battle. Owning one made you a nerd. With the GT3 RS, that flipped. It wasn't trying to be anything other than the greatest possible 911 for that current generation. So it didn't matter that this was the 996. The 996 GT3 RS did more than just show what maximum engineering could do. It showed that Rennsport was back! Visual cues that had made the 2.7 RS special returned with it, like lightweight wheels in blue or red to match the decals on the side. And best of all, we got it here. So how do you follow up on greatness? How could Andy avoid the second album slump? Well, starting with a winner definitely helps. In stark contrast to the poor reception of the 996, the 997 was an immediate hit when sales began in 2005. A GT3 followed in 2006, and for once, we didn't have to wait long for the next RS, which arrived in 2007. And when I say we, I mean Americans! This time, Porsche took the chance that we were ready to get on board the RS train, which is good because this one was a huge step forward. The car was lighter than the normal GT3, more powerful, wider, and had an even bigger rear wing, producing even more downforce at speed with 3 E's. In its final form, the 997 GT3 RS 4.0 had the largest engine ever offered in a road legal 911, making 493 horsepower. Think about that. A 4-liter 6-cylinder with no turbos making almost 500 horsepower. Before the GT3 RS, that was the kind of thing that you only found in race cars! Yeah! Once again, the GT3 RS was faster around the Nürburgring than its turbocharged big brother, the GT2, but that was no longer the top 911 because with the 997 generation, the GT2 got RSified. But the GT2 RS wasn't produced because of sibling rivalry. It was invented because Nissan showed up and broke the Nürburgring time record. The development of the GT2 RS internally was called Project 727, named for the Nürburgring lap time achieved by the mighty R35 GTR. To ensure success, Porsche engineers gave the GT2 RS 612 horsepower, shed 154 pounds over the regular GT2, and achieved the top speed of 205 miles an hour. The Nissan GTR is a great car, but it simply couldn't stand against Porsche's engineering might. In the end, the GT2 RS clocked a 7:18, beating the Nissan by 9 seconds. But here's the thing about the GT2 RS. It's more powerful, more turbocharged, and more expensive than the GT3 RS, but it's not better. It's different. In the words of one Porsche employee, the GT2 RS is the hand of God Porsche. It's designed primarily for maximum, even gratuitous amounts of power. The GT2 RS is a machete. The GT3 RS is a scalpel. The GT3 RS is the one that the engineers really invest their time, energy, and innovation into. And with the 991 generation, that becomes very apparent. If the 997 was RS's surprising sophomore album, the 991 GT3 RS is the moment they go from indie darling to full-blown stadium rock god, Drake. It's their Chapel Roan moment. People hadn't always been on board with RS cars. These were nerdy, the product of a singular obsession with engineering. That made them incredibly expensive and incredibly uncomfortable and difficult to drive, at least compared to a regular 911. But it also made them incredibly cool. Now, every historically cool thing from blue jeans to mid-century modern design is the way it is to serve a purpose. Okay, blue jeans were designed to be tough, not cool, to meet the needs of cowboys and gold miners. Every detail serves that purpose. The rivets add strength at the corners to prevent fraying. The triple stitching prevents tears. Even the color was chosen for toughness. Indigo dye only partially penetrates the denim. As the outer layer fades from washing and wear, some of the dark pigment that is seeped further into the fibers remains. Mid-century modern design gave us some of the most distinctive and coolest buildings, homes, furniture, even appliances, but these were primarily designed for functionality and simplicity, stripping away any unnecessary ornamentation and having the ability to mass produce them. Materials like plastic and plywood were chosen for their low cost, making products accessible to all, and because those materials permitted new shapes and forms. And in buildings, spaces were designed to be uncluttered, to aim the mind by freeing it from distraction. Of course, lots of things are designed with function first, but the ones that rise up and have a legacy, that's because they end up serving that purpose better than anything else. That's because somebody really thought about what they were creating and why. These creators remain true to that central mission and are authentic in their purpose. It doesn't matter what other people think. It doesn't matter what the market thinks. They know what they're doing is right, necessary even, to make something great. They aren't designing something to be popular, they're designing it to be the best. Now, for a machine like a car, with thousands of pieces all moving together, the only way to achieve that is to be absolutely obsessed with its design, its engineering. Nobody ever made a great car by accident. That obsession is what RS means on a 911 GT3. It's the highest performing 911 that is possible at the time. The letters RS are reserved for the best of the 911s, which is a pretty great car in any form, and that means that in its final form, it's a world beater. Yes, Porsche! Sometimes Ferrari, Lamborghini, McLaren, or the other guys are faster, but the sum of an RS Porsche's parts gives it a lasting power that other race cars for the road simply can't touch. It's where engineering becomes art. It turns out that a consequence of that obsession with function is a thing that's also incredibly aesthetically pleasing. We can see that it's a triumph, and we love that. Humans love to win. We're proud of it. Jeans look great, so do mid-century modern homes. And no car looks nearly as cool as a 911 parked in front of a mid-century modern house while wearing jeans. The RS models are built for maximum performance and take extreme measures to get there. That's a process of building upon what's already there. It's an engineering transition that happens for every RS 911. That starts with a base Carrera 2, which is built upon to make a Carrera 2S and improved more for a GTS, then a lot more for a GT3, before finally landing at GT3 RS. When that happened for the 991 generation, almost nothing was left untouched. There wasn't some list of specific features that were engineered to racy perfection. It was the entire thing. The front fenders had louvers added for better aerodynamics. The rear fenders had turbo-like cutouts because that's where the engine's intake is now, instead of on the rear engine cover below the wing. That wing generated up to 900 pounds of downforce. And speaking of engine, it was completely different from the one in the GT3 with a 9,000 RPM redline and 513 horsepower. That got the GT3 around the Nürburgring in 7 minutes, 1 second quicker than the 918 hypercar. The inside was as you'd expect: roll cage, racing harnesses, those little fabric handles that everyone made fun of, and then every other car company decided to add to their own racing models. Porsche didn't do that to flex its race car credentials. They did it because it is a race car and door handles are too f***ing heavy. Porsche's commitment to only include genuine race car stuff did create a problem, however. The 991 GT3 RS was the first where a normal 3-pedal manual was not available. A lot of purists were upset by that. I mean, how could a performance car not have a stick shift? Well, this is Rennsport. It's not about what people like. It's about racing, baby. It's about what actually performs, not what feels fast. The GT3 race cars ditched the stick shift after the 996 generation, so the GT3 RS had to as well. The only reason the 997 GT3 RS had a 3-pedal manual is because, according to Andy, Porsche's PDK dual-clutch sequential gearbox wasn't advanced enough yet. And by the time the 991 rolled around, it was. So that meant there was no real choice. The RS has to be the best, and fast is always the best. Which brings us to today, everyone. The current generation 992 GT3 RS. The 992 GT3 RS carried on using Porsche's PDK as the only option, and like the 991, nearly every part is different from the lesser 911s that it's based on. One of the biggest changes over the previous RS is aerodynamics. RS engineers went as far as changing the suspension wishbones and steering tie rods from cylindrical to teardrop shaped to reduce drag and turbulence in the wheel wells. Its rear wing now generates up to 1,900 pounds of downforce. It has DRS. You know, the drag reduction system used by Formula One cars. It can be left in automatic, where it will open or close based on vehicle data, or you can open it manually by pushing a button, a DRS button in your car. Now, adjustability becomes the theme with the 992 GT3 RS. The shocks can be adjusted between 8 settings, independently for compression and rebound, and independently from front and rear. In total, the suspension has 6,561 possible configurations, because 6,560 ain't enough, Jack. There's an adjustable differential with a steering wheel dial to set the level between full open and full lock. It can be adjusted independently for acceleration and coasting. The traction control has 8 settings. Stability control has 3. So why is it so adjustable? With the 992, the RS engineers pulled their greatest trick yet. They fixed the one thing they could never seem to improve: you. The 992 has so much adjustability that the driver is left to figure out how to make the best 911 possible for them. That's not laziness, it's a gift from one set of nerds to another. The GT3 RS is made by engineers who are obsessed with performance and getting the most from their cars. The 992 GT3 RS is made for the drivers who are equally obsessed. It turns out that the engineers could never create perfect performance. They don't know where or how their car is going to be used. And there were too many possibilities. They're kind of stuck creating a solution that's somewhere in the middle, compromised. But the solution to that compromise turns out to be giving you the tools to solve that problem yourself. What that means is the RS is a car that many car enthusiasts aren't ready to understand. You have to reach a level of nerdiness that's close to those engineers. The cars and coffee crowd, the Instagrammers flexing, the canyon carvers who've never been to a racetrack call it overrated. But the Chads and Chad adjacent aren't ready for it. They can't possibly understand it, which takes us all the way back to the first RS car, the 550. By all accounts, what those engineers came up with was tough to drive. You had to figure it out. The 992 GT3 RS carries on that tradition. The engineers have equipped it with the best tools possible, but ultimately, it's up to you to make it perform. And just like the 550, you can get it wrong. And at a time when cars are increasingly doing everything for us, one that leaves the thinking up to you is refreshing. It respects your nerdiness, and that is cool. I told you guys it was gonna be a long one. Thanks for sticking around to the end. Jesse and I wanna thank you for all the support that you guys have shown us. It's scary doing a new thing, but you guys being here has made it so much more exciting, and we're just really stoked to get out on our own and do this. So thank you. Thanks again to our sponsor, Simply Safe. If you care about your family or your stuff, which you should, click the link below to check them out. Just go to the website, look at it. I'm sure you noticed the 3D renders in this video. Those are custom by our friend Max. He absolutely killed it. He also has a body kit company, so he makes stuff IRL. Check them out. Just had a new kit come out for an E46. It's sweet. That's what we do here at Speed. Amazing writing, great research, phenomenal editing, custom 3D renders, humor, 8 out of 10. Other performance, 6 to 7 out of 10. Put them all together, you got a pretty good hour-long video. That's why you gotta click on Simply Safe. Subscribe. The subscriber and view number is directly tied to how I feel about myself at this point in this venture. So I need that hit, that freaking number hit. So please subscribe.